the TLDR, the Cliff Notes, is like, well, why are we even talking about this? Because very online people keep bringing up the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, not knowing what they're talking about. They're actually taking pro-Nazi talking points by talking shit about the USSR intervening in Poland. Isn't that fascinating? They're actually making an argument. If they were alive at the time, they'd be making an argument, oh, just let Hitler take Poland, set up a pro-Nazi state. These people are sick. So that's why we're even talking about it, is because very online people keep bringing it up. Why do they keep bringing it up? Because they think it makes the USSR look bad. If you look into it, it makes them look fucking brilliant, actually. They did nothing wrong. All right, so the point of today's is to talk about this. I wanted to talk about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Specifically, what I want to do is go over what the D program has as a auto-moderator response. We're going to read through it. We may even check out the video essays, too. We're going to start by looking at this, and we'll also check out some other replies in this thread that I made on the D program subreddit. Alrighty, here we go. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. You guys know what this is? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not at all, or 0 to 10, on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being none at all, 10 being as much as you can know about this topic, how much do you think you know about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact? I'm about... before I read through this, I was like a 4, maybe? A 3? 4? But now, having read through this, I think I'm up there. I'm like a 7. I'm like an 8. Still probably more to learn, and there's always context. But here we go. Let's read through this. And away we go. Anti-communists. And 4.3, huh? Pretty good. Anti-communists and horseshoe theorists love to tell anyone who will listen that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939 was a military alliance between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. They frame it as a cynical and opportunistic agreement between two totalitarian powers that paved the way for the outbreak of World War II in order to equate communism with fascism. They are, of course, missing key context. This is a form of misinformation that they do, because it's not disinformation necessarily to bring up the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact unless they lie about it, in which case it becomes disinformation. But this is a form of misinformation which capitalizes on most normies' unfamiliarity with this. Because, most people just simply don't study World War II. However, the fascists will always have an argument up their sleeve to paint the Soviets as the evil ones. Reading on, German background. The loss of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles had a profound effect on the German economy. Signed in 1919, the treaty imposed harsh reparations on the newly formed Weimar Republic from 1919 to 1933, forcing the country to pay billions of dollars in damages to the Allied powers. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war, required Germany to cede all of its political possessions to the Allied powers. This included territories in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, including Germany East Africa, German Southwest Africa, Togoland, Cameroon, and German New Guinea. With an understanding of historical materialism, like I've been saying, you guys, and the role that imperialism plays in maintaining a liberal democracy, we should put in quotes, it's clear that the national bourgeoisie would embrace fascism under those conditions. Ask, what is imperialism, and what is fascism for more? And yeah, I guess you could type this and then the auto mod will give you more answers, I'm assuming. Judeo-Bolshevism, a conspiracy theory which claimed that Jews were responsible for the Russian Revolution of 1917 and that they've used communism as a cover to further their own interests, gained significant traction in Nazi Germany, where it became a central part of Nazi propaganda and ideology. Adolf Hitler, I don't know why I said it like that, and other leading members of the Nazi Party frequently used the term to vilify Jews and justify the persecution. The Communist Party of Germany, the KPD, was repressed by the Nazi regime soon after they came to power in 1933. Ask yourself who went into the first concentration camps, and you've got your answer. In the weeks following the Reichstag fire, the Nazis arrested and imprisoned thousands of communists and other political dissidents. Yes, I did pre-read this. This played a significant role in the passage of the Enabling Act of 1933, which granted Hitler and the Nazi Party dictatorial powers and effectively dismantled the Weimar Republic. Soviet background. Following the Russian Revolution of 1917, Great Britain and other Western powers placed strict trade restrictions on the Soviet Union. These restrictions were aimed at isolating the Soviet Union and weakening its economy in an attempt to force the new communist government to collapse. In the 1920s, the Soviet Union under Lenin's leadership was sympathetic towards Germany because the two countries shared a common enemy in the form of Western capitalist powers, particularly France and Great Britain. You might be surprised to hear this, but Lenin was a Marxist-Leninist. And he understood that in the course of a nation, in that all things, as Marxism teaches us, which is that all things are in a state of development, and primary contradictions can become secondary contradictions, and secondary contradictions can become primary contradictions. Yeah, you might be. Yeah, he was a follower of Leninism. What are the chances? What are the chances? The Soviet Union and Germany established diplomatic relations and engaged in economic cooperation with each other. The Soviet Union provided technical and economic assistance to Germany, and in return, it received access to German industrial and technological expertise, as well as trade opportunities. However, this cooperation was short-lived, and by the late 1920s, relations between the two countries had deteriorated. The Soviet Union's efforts to export its socialist ideology to Germany were met with resistance from the German government and the rising Nazi Party, which viewed communism as a threat to its own ideology and ambitions. And they would be right. You won't find someone who hates Nazis more than, number one, victims of Nazis and their families, and then number two, communists. The communists are the most opposed to Nazis, and that's a good thing, goddammit. Collective security from 1933 to 1939, the appointment of Hitler as Germany's Chancellor General, as well as the rising threat from Japan, led to the important changes in Soviet foreign policy. Oriented towards Germany since the Treaty of Locarno of 1925 and the Treaty of Special Relations with Berlin of 1926, the Kremlin now moved in the opposite direction by trying to establish closer ties with France and Britain to isolate the growing Nazi threat. Ah, look at that. A secondary contradiction has become the primary contradiction in the growing Nazi threat, and the primary contradiction is becoming a secondary contradiction as represented by their willingness to establish closer ties with those countries that were previously oriented against. You tracking me? Good. This policy became known as collective security and was associated with Maxim Litvinov. Am I saying that right? I'm not going to say it like that. The Soviet foreign minister at the time. The pursuit of collective security lasted approximately as long as he held that position. Japan's war with China took some pressure off of Russia by allowing it to focus its diplomatic efforts on relations with Europe. The memories of the Russian Revolution and the fear of communism were still fresh in the minds of many Western leaders, and there was a reluctance to enter into an alliance with the Soviet Union. They believed that Hitler was a bulwark against communism and that a strong Germany could act as a buffer against Soviet expansion. That's right. In capitalist countries, the rise of Nazism was not becoming a primary contradiction. Instead of joining the USSR in a collective security alliance against Nazi Germany, the Western leaders decided to try appeasing Nazi Germany. As part of the policy of appeasement, several territories were ceded to Nazi Germany in the late 1930s. the Rhineland. In March 1936, Nazi Germany remilitarized the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone along the border between Germany and France. This move violated the Treaty of Versailles and marked the beginning of Nazi Germany's aggressive territorial expansion. Austria. In March of 1938, Nazi Germany annexed Austria in what's known as the Anschluss. This move violated the Treaty of Versailles and the Treaty of Saint-Germain, which established Austria as a separate state following World War I. Yeah. We were taught in high school that the Euros appeased Germany to prevent another world war. It turns out they were throwing the Soviet Union under the bus. If you got a Western education, you were almost certainly fed propaganda, right? Number 3, in the Sudetenland. In September 1938, the leaders of Great Britain, France, and Italy signed the Munich Agreement, which allowed Nazi Germany to annex the Sudetenland, a region in western Czechoslovakia with a large ethnic German population. Number 4, Memel. In March 1939, Nazi Germany annexed the Memel region of Lithuania. Maybe that explains why there's still some fucking Nazis in Lithuania, right? There's definitely something in the water up there, right? This had been under French administration since World War I. Number 5, Bohemia and Moravia. In March 1939, Nazi Germany annexed Bohemia and Moravia. I'm saying it wrong, I'm sorry. The remaining parts of Czechoslovakia that had not been annexed following the Munich Agreement. However, instead of appeasing Nazi Germany by giving in to their territorial demands, these concessions only emboldened them and ultimately led to the outbreak of World War II. Whoops. And that brings us to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. These were papers which were kept secret for almost 70 years that show the Soviet Union proposed sending a powerful military force in an effort to entice Britain and France into an anti-Nazi alliance. Such an agreement could have changed the course of 20th century history. The offer of a military force to help contain Hitler was made by a senior Soviet military delegation at a Kremlin meeting with senior British and French officers 2 weeks before the war broke out in 1939. The new documents show the vast numbers of infantry, artillery, and airborne forces which Stalin's generals said could be dispatched if Polish objections to the Red Army crossing its territory could first be overcome. But the British and French side, briefed by their governments to talk, but not authorized to commit to binding deals, did not respond to the Soviet offer. After trying and failing to get Western capitalist powers to join the Soviet Union in a collective security alliance against Nazi Germany, and witnessing country after country being ceded, it became clear to Soviet leadership that war was inevitable, and Poland was next. Fortunately, there was a widespread belief in Poland that Jews were overrepresented in the Soviet government, Judeo-Bolshevism, and that the Soviet Union was being controlled by Jewish communists. Hold on. This buddy boy is being naughty, and so he got locked up. And so let's see if we can calm him down. This conspiracy theory, Judeo-Bolshevism, was fueled by anti-Semitic propaganda that was prevalent in Poland at the time. The Polish government was strongly anti-communist and had been actively involved in suppressing communist movements in Poland and other parts of Europe. Furthermore, the Polish government believed that it could rely on the support of Britain and France in the event of a conflict. He's so big now. He's so big. I'm telling you, he's heavy and thick. Polish government signed a mutual defense pact with Britain in March of 1939. I love you. And believed that this would deter Germany from attacking Poland. Seeing the writing on the wall, the Soviet Union made the difficult decision to do what it felt needed to do to survive the coming conflict. At the time of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact signing of August of 1939, the Soviet Union was facing significant military pressure from the West, particularly from Britain and France, which were seeking to isolate the Soviet Union and undermine its influence in Europe. The Soviet Union saw the pact as a way to counterbalance this pressure and to gain more time to build up its military strength and prepare for the inevitable conflict with Nazi Germany, which began less than 2 years later, June 41, Operation Barbarossa. And they gave us additional resources and video essays. I want to come back to these and check them out. However, there were some other comments in the thread. You're such a good boy. There were other comments in the thread that helped me to understand as well. So let me get to those comments. Oh, here's a funny bit. Why did the Soviets sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact? Because they were Stalin for time. All right, so here's another comment. The first point is that the Soviet Union did not ally with the Nazis at any point in time. Do not let anyone get away with saying that. That's when you're getting into blatant disinformation. That's a fucking lie. It's moronic to think that a non-aggression pact means an alliance. Yes. Many European countries signed treaties and non-aggression pacts with Nazi Germany. Some were way more substantial than the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Let me pull up my graphic here. Treaties signed with Hitler, and they all want to point to the USSR and say, oh, USSR bad. And then they go, oh, well, this one's different because something they had a secret deal with Hitler to split up Poland. Okay. Should the Soviets let the Nazis take all of Poland? What are you saying, right? Even Poland signed a non-aggression pact with them. Some of these non-aggression pacts were way more substantial than the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which by no means are they represented as alliances by Western historians. So why the double standards? In 1933, the UK and France signed the Four Power Pact with Germany and Italy. In 1934, Poland signed a non-aggression pact with Germany. 1935, as we were saying, the UK signed a naval agreement with Germany. 1938, the UK and France both signed non-aggression pact with Germany alongside the infamous Munich Agreement, who cemented the view of the Soviet leadership that Western European countries had no interest in an active alliance against Nazi Germany despite Soviet efforts, as we were just reading. Let's not also forget that while the Soviet Union sent weapons, manpower, and military advisors to Republicans to fight the fascist rebellion in Spain, the UK, France, and US held a policy of neutrality and decided not to intervene. In June of 1939, Estonia and Latvia signed a non-aggression pact with Germany. Only after all these did the Soviet Union sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in August of 1939 as a means to buy time for an inevitable war with Nazi Germany. You don't make an alliance with someone that you know you're going to eventually go to war with. So to call it a non-aggression pact, which is you're not doing anything together. You're just simply not doing something, which is going to war with each other. That's not an ally. What the fuck? Not going to war against each other is not an ally. But they'll say this thing like something, the Nazis and the Soviets started the war together. Like, what? Shut the fuck up, dude. It's well known the Nazis had plans to invade the Soviet Union even before they took power. After the Soviet Union and Germany signed the pact, Stalin was reported saying, "It's all a game to see who can fool whom. I know what Hitler's up to. He thinks he's outsmarted me, but it's I who have tricked him." The second point on the joint invasion of Poland was not the fruit of a plan by two totalitarian powers to mischievously divide Poland amongst themselves. History's got nuance. First, Poland declared war on Nazi Germany when they invaded, but not the Soviet Union. So, when these sickos are like, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had a deal, a secret deal where they split up Poland. Ask them why Poland declared war on Nazi Germany when they invaded, but not the Soviet Union. Ask them why Polish Supreme Commander Edward Ryszard ordered Polish soldiers not to fight the Soviets, but he ordered the Polish forces to continue fighting the Germans. Ask them that. For people who say, Nazi Germany and USSR split up Poland, ask them why the UK and France had mutual defense treaties with Poland, yet they didn't declare war on the Soviet Union because it wasn't an invasion, something even the League of Nations accepted. Ask them those things and watch them flail. In realistic terms, when Nazi Germany invaded Western Poland, the Polish government fled, leaving Poland without anyone to govern. The whole country would have been occupied by Nazi Germany had the Soviets not stepped in to take Eastern Poland. So these people who say, oh, they made a secret deal to split up Poland, ask them, should they have let Nazi Germany take all of Poland and then watch them flail? It was therefore not a joint invasion, but the Soviets actively denying Germany valuable territory and gaining a buffer zone that proved vital when Operation Barbarossa began. If they hadn't done it, the Soviets may not have defeated the Nazis. Isn't that right? Unfortunately, maintaining an independent Poland was not an option at the time. But again, anyone who's making this point about Nazi Germany and USSR allegedly splitting up Poland, these people are either propagandized, they're too stupid to know what they're talking about, or they're relying on people who are too stupid to know what they're talking about. Or they're the ones doing the propaganda, right? Those are really the two options here. On a related note, Eastern Poland, the part that was occupied by the Soviets, included former Ukrainian and Belarusian territories. How do you even say this out loud?
Byelorussian.
It doesn't sound right. So, countries that were part of the Soviet Union, that Poland had gained after their war against the Bolsheviks in 1920. After the war ended, the Soviet Union maintained such territories and incorporated them into the Ukrainian and Belarusian SSR. Byelorussian. Byelorussian. Those territories were also inhabited by other Slavs, Jews, Roma, and Poles that would have most likely been killed or enslaved had Nazi Germany gotten a hold of them. Without the victory of the Soviet Union in World War II, there would be no independent Poland today. So you get to ask that question. Okay. If the Soviet Union did not intervene in Poland, there likely would be no Poland today. The Nazis likely would have won. At the very least, it would have made it a lot more difficult for the Soviet Union to defeat the Nazis, right? It's possible it could have led to Poland not even existing today. But that's the thing with like these liberals, is they'll say anything, you know? They'll say absolutely anything, even if it means that even if it means their propaganda actually hurts the people they claim to care about. Xinjiang's a great example of this. This is a great example of this, right? Aside from what the bot already said, they considered Poland to have already preemptively have been lost to the Nazis if the pact hadn't been signed. So it was a way of saving as much of Poland as they could. And here's Grover Furr on the matter. Grover Furr replies to the question, did the Soviet Union invade Poland in September 1939? The answer, no, it did not. He replies. There you go. Yeah. Here's a recent article in the New York Review of Books by Timothy Snyder, Yale University professor, academic expert in this area, and fanatic anti-communist. Fucking libs. Who has to know that what he writes here is, to put it politely, false. He writes, because the film, although not the book, begins with the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 rather than the joint German-Soviet invasion and division of Poland in 1939. I'm so sick of this, right? There it is. The Soviet state had just months before been an ally of Nazi Germany. Shut the fuck up, dude. And they play it on PBS. After invading Poland in September 1939, the Nazis and the Soviets divided the country as they had agreed to in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And this is on PBS. Here's the Wikipedia article on Poland. The Red Army invaded Poland from the east on the September 17th. Every historian I've read, says Grover Furr, even those who do not conform to Cold War paradigms, state unproblematically that the Soviet Union invaded Poland in 1939. This has been one of these liberal talking points that's been getting under my fucking skin. And so I've just had to dig into this. You know what I mean? I just have to do this. It's been sort of high time that I do this. The truth is that the USSR did not invade Poland in September 1939, even though the chances are that at least 99 to 1, that every history book you could find says that it did. I've yet to find an English language book that gets it correct. And of course, the USSR had never been an ally of Nazi Germany. Only a fucking only someone who is historically illiterate would say this. Or they are historically literate and they're propagandizing. I'll present a lot of evidence in support of this statement. There's a great deal more evidence to support what I say, much more than I can present here. No doubt, more that I have not yet even identified or located. I think I'm going to read the whole thing here. Furthermore, at the time it was widely acknowledged that no such invasion occurred, and I'll demonstrate this too. Now that's easier to read, isn't it? Probably the truth of the matter was another victim of the post-World War II Cold War, when a great many falsehoods about Soviet history were invented or popularized. The truth about this and many other questions concerning the history of the first socialist state has simply become unmentionable in polite company. Demonizing. I use the word advisedly, it's not too strong. The history of the communist movement and anything to do with Stalin has become de rigueur. How do you say this?
De rigueur.
De rigueur, a shibboleth of respectability, and not only among avowed champions of capitalism, but among ourselves. On the left, among Marxists, opponents of capitalism, the natural constituency of a movement for communism. Some time ago, Doug Henwood tweaked me on the MLG list for defending Stalin. Doug Henwood's a Jacobin writer. I can make a crack about what defenses of Stalin have to do with a sensible materialism, but that would be beneath me. Doug thinks he knows something about Stalin and the USSR during Stalin's time. He doesn't. But you can't blame him too much, since none of us do. More precisely, we know a lot of things about the Soviet Union and Stalin, and almost all of those things are not just true, are just not true. We've been swallowing lies for the truth our whole lives. It's 86 in Chicago right now. He says, I'll be brief in this presentation. I prepared separate web pages with references to much of the evidence I've found. Not all, there is just too much. I'm also preparing a longer version for eventual publication. The Non-Aggression Treaty between Germany and the USSR of August 39. For discussion of the events that led to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 39, an excellent account is still Bill Bland, the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact of 39 from 1990. I've checked every citation into this article. Most are available online now. It's very accurate, but far more detailed than the present article requires. Before we get into the question of the invasion that did not take place, the reader needs to become familiar with some misconceptions about the Non-Aggression Treaty and why they are false. These two are based on anti-communist propaganda that's widely, if naively, believed. The most common and most false of these is stated in the PBS series Behind Closed Doors. Yeah. And it says the Nazis and the Soviets divided the country as they agreed to do in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. This is completely false, as any reading of the text of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, I'm just going to say MR now, itself will reveal. Just look at the words on the page, see below. The Soviets wanted to protect the USSR and therefore to preserve independent Poland. For the text of the MR Pact, see m-rpact.html. Here. It's conventionally stated as fact that the Non-Aggression Pact between the USSR and Germany, often called the MR Pact or Treaty, after the two foreign ministers who signed it, was an agreement to partition Poland, divide it up. This is completely false. I prepared a page with much fuller evidence. See, the secret protocols to the MR Pact did not plan any partition of Poland. No doubt a big reason for this falsehood is this. Britain and France did sign a non-aggression pact with Hitler that partitioned another state, Czechoslovakia. That was the Munich Agreement of September 30th, 1938. But no one's trying to paint the leaders of Britain and France in the same way that they're trying to paint Stalin and the Soviets. Isn't that curious? Poland, too, took part in the partition of Czechoslovakia, too. Poland seized part of the, I don't know how to say this,
Cieszyn
area of Czechoslovakia, even though it had only a minority Polish population. This invasion and occupation was not even agreed upon in the Munich Agreement, but neither France nor Britain did anything about it. Hitler seized the remaining part of Czechoslovakia in March of 1939. That's not it, yeah. It was a swing and a miss, huh? This had not been foreseen in the Munich Agreement, but Britain, France, and Poland did nothing about it. So, the anti-communist allies, Britain, France, and Poland, really did participate in the partitioning of a powerless state. Maybe that's why the anti-communist party line is that the USSR did likewise. Maybe. But whatever the reason for this lie, it remains a lie. The Soviet Union signed the Non-Aggression Pact with Germany not to partition Poland like the Allies had partitioned Czechoslovakia, but in order to defend the USSR. The treaty included a line of Soviet interests with Poland beyond which German troops could not pass in the event Germany routed the Polish army in a war. That doesn't mean they split Poland, but that's how they frame it. They're fucking liars, you guys. Never trust a liberal. Point here was that if the Polish army were beaten, it and the Polish government could retreat beyond the line of Soviet interest, and so find shelter, since Hitler had agreed not to penetrate further into Poland than that line. From there, they could make peace with Germany. The USSR would have a buffer state, armed and hostile to Germany, between the Reich and the Soviet frontier. The Soviets, Stalin, to use a crude synecdoche, that's a part that stands for the whole, that's a great word, did not do this out of any love for fascist Poland. The Soviets wanted a Polish government, any Polish government, as a buffer between the USSR and the Nazi armies. The utter betrayal of the fascist Polish government of its own people frustrated this plan. As far as the rest of the world was concerned, the Polish government had two alternatives in the event its army was smashed by an attacking army. One, it could stay inside the country, perhaps moving its capital away from the invading army. From there, it could have sued for peace or surrendered. Two, the Polish government could have fled to an allied country that was at war with Germany, either France or England. Thank you. The governments of all other countries defeated by Germany did one or both of these things. The Polish government, exactly, racist, anti-communist, hyper-nationalist, in short, fascist, as bad as they get, didn't do either. Rather than fight, the Polish government fled into neighboring Romania. Romania was neutral in the war. By crossing into neutral Romania, the Polish government became prisoners. The legal word is interned. They could not function as a government from Romania or pass through Romania to a country at war with Germany like France, because to permit them to do that would be a violation of Romania's neutrality, a hostile act against Germany. I'll say this explanation is hitting. This might be a better explanation than the one that's on that subreddit, the Autobot. This is really good. The USSR did not invade Poland, and everyone knew it at the time. Everyone knew. So it's like a fiction. It's like a more modern fiction. When Poland had no government, Poland was no longer a state. What this meant was this: at this point, Hitler had nobody with whom to negotiate a ceasefire or treaty. Furthermore, the MR Treaty's secret protocols were void, since they were in agreement about the state of Poland, and no state of Poland existed any longer. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact disinformation agents will never tell you this. And it's no surprise to me that it's always anti-communists that try to use the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact as somehow evidence that the USSR is bad, instead of the clear problem, which is the fucking problem of the Nazis. And if they want to ask themselves why the Nazis rose, it's partly because of the undue burdens, the unreasonable burdens put on Germany This is the biggest outside cause, other than obviously all of the internal causes of Nazism and its rise of anti-Semitism, etc., etc., etc. One of the biggest external causes was the West fucking with Germany. And I'm reading on here, unless the Red Army came in to prevent it, there was nothing to prevent the Nazis from coming right up to the Soviet border. So again, the question for these disinformation agents is, what do you want? Did you want Nazi to take the entirety of Poland and then watch them shit their pants because they don't know what they're talking about? Or, as we now know, they were in fact preparing to do, Hitler could have formed one or more pro-Nazi states in what had until recently been Eastern Poland. That way Hitler could have had it both ways. Claimed to the Soviets that he was still adhering to the spheres of influence agreement of the MR Pact, while in fact setting up a pro-Nazi, highly militarized fascist Ukrainian nationalist state on the Soviet border. So you can ask those disinformation agents if they want that too. When they go, oh, something, something, Nazis and Stalin split up Poland. It's not true, but if you didn't want the USSR to intervene, did you want it? Did you want the Nazis to set up a highly militarized fascist Ukrainian nationalist state? Is that what you wanted? Like, what did you want? They act like they didn't want the Soviets to intervene. But if they didn't intervene, it would have, bad things would have happened. Once the Nazis had told the Soviets that the Nazis, had decided that the Polish state no longer existed, then it didn't make any difference whether the Soviets agreed or not. The Nazis were telling them that they felt free to come right up to the Soviet border. Neither the USSR nor any state would have permitted such a thing. Nor did international law demand it. At the end of September, a new secret agreement was concluded. In it, the Soviet line of interest was far to the east of the sphere of influence line decided upon a month earlier in the secret protocol and published in Izvestia and in the New York Times during September 1939. This reflected Hitler's greater power now that he had smashed the Polish military. See map. The line goes farther. Shorter front line, now they have a river to defend. In this territory, Poles were a minority even after the Polonization campaign of settling Poles in the area during the 20s and 30s. You can see the ethnic and linguistic population map at here. You guys are my Grover furries, yeah. My pay pigs and my Grover furries. How do we know this interpretation of events is true? How do we know the USSR did not commit aggression against or invade Poland when it occupied eastern Poland beginning on September 17th, 1939, after the Polish government had interned itself in Romania? Here are 9 pieces of evidence, 9 times. 1. The Polish government did not declare war on the USSR, but they did declare war on the Nazis. They declared war on Germany when Germany invaded. It didn't declare war on the USSR. We talked about this before. Polish Supreme Commander ordered Polish soldiers not to fight the Soviets, but they were continuing to fight the Germans. Polish president interned in Romania tacitly admitted Poland no longer had a government. 4. Romanian government tacitly admitted that Poland no longer had a government. The Romanian position recognized the fact that Moszczycki was blowing smoke when he claimed that he had legally resigned on September 30th. So the Romanian government fabricated a story according to which Moszczycki had already resigned back on September 15th, just before entering Romania and being interned. Note that Moszczycki himself did not claim this, and I'm really sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Romania needed this legal fiction to try to sidestep the following issue. Once Moszczycki had been interned in Romania, that is, from September 17, 1939 on, he could not function as president of Poland. Since resignation is an official act, he could not resign once he was in Romania. For our present purposes, here's the significant point. Both the Polish leaders and the Romanian government recognized that Poland was bereft of a government once the Polish government crossed the border into Romania and were interned there. Both Moszczyki and Romania wanted a legal basis, a fig leaf, for such a government, but they disagreed completely about this fig leaf, which exposes it as what it was, a fiction. Number 5. Romania had a military treaty with Poland aimed against the USSR. Romania did not declare war on the USSR. The Polish government later claimed that it had released Romania from its obligations under this military treaty in return for safe haven in Romania. But there's no evidence for this statement. No wonder. It is at least highly unlikely that Romania would have ever promised safe haven for Poland, since that would have been an act of hostility against Nazi Germany. Romania was neutral in the war, and as discussed below, insisted upon imprisoning the Polish government and disarming the Polish force once they had crossed the border into Romania. The real reason for Romania's failure to declare war on the USSR is probably the one given in a New York Times article of September 39. The Romanian viewpoint concerning the Romanian-Polish anti-Soviet agreement is that it would be operative only if a Russian attack came as an isolated event and not as a consequence of other wars. Yeah, Matt, wow. That means Romania recognized that the Red Army was not allied with Germany and other war. This is tacit recognition of the Soviet and German position that Poland no longer had a government and therefore was no longer a state. Number 6. France did not declare war on the USSR, though it had a mutual defense treaty with Poland. See here for the text of the secret military protocol of this treaty, which has been, quote, lost, that is, which the French government still keeps secret. 7. England never demanded that the USSR withdraw its troops from Western, how do we do this one? Bielorussia? Bielorussia and Western Ukraine, the parts of the former Polish state occupied by the Red Army after September 17th, 39. On the contrary, the British government concluded that these territories should not be a part of the future Polish state. Even the Polish government in exile agreed. You can see documents in the original Russian, with the relevant quotations translated into English below them. I'll move on. Number 8. The League of Nations did not determine the USSR had invaded a member state. Article 16 of the League of Nations Covenant required members to take trade and economic sanctions against any member who resorted to war. No country took any sanctions against the USSR. No country broke diplomatic relations with the USSR over this action. However, when the USSR attacked Finland in 1939, the League did vote to expel the USSR, and several countries broke diplomatic relations with it. A very different response, which tells us how the League viewed the Soviet action in the case of Poland. Folks, we're looking at something which is called a dialectical style of analysis, in which we're looking at something from all sides. Number 9. All countries accepted the USSR Declaration of Neutrality. All, including the belligerent Polish allies, France and England, agreed that the USSR was not a belligerent power, was not participating in the war. In effect, they accepted the USSR's claim that it was neutral in the conflict. Yeah, how about that map, huh? All right, let's get that out of there. All right, that was 9. You can see FDR's proclamation 2374 on neutrality from November 39. He says, a state of war unhappily exists between Germany and France, Poland, and the United Kingdom, India, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the Union of South Africa. Okay. Next, the Soviet Union is not mentioned as a belligerent. That means the USA did not consider the USSR to be at war with Poland. For the Soviet Union's claim of neutrality, see this website. Naturally, a country cannot invade another country and yet credibly claim that it is neutral with respect to the war involving that country. But none of these countries declared the USSR a belligerent, nor did the United States, the League of Nations, or any country in the world. However, you have some very entirely online people that insist that that's exactly what happened, right? Next, the Polish state collapsed. By September 17, 1939, when Soviet troops crossed the border, the Polish government ceased to function. The fact that Poland no longer had a government meant that Poland was no longer a state. So, Nazi Germany's invading. What are you going to do if you are the USSR? What are you going to do if you're Stalin? Are you just going to let the Nazis take all the land right up to your border? What would you do? On September 17th, when Molotov handed Polish ambassador to the USSR Grabowski the note, Grabowski told Molotov that he did not know where his government was, but had been informed that he should contact it through Bucharest. Yes. Yeah. In fact, the last elements of the Polish government crossed the border into Romania and so into internment during the day of September 17th, according to a United Press dispatch published on page 4 of the New York Times, blah, 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 with a dateline of... Okay. Without a government, Poland as a state had ceased to exist under international law. This fact is denied, more often simply ignored, by anti-communists for whom it is a bone in the throat. That's one of those weird phrases, right? We take a closer look at this issue in the next section below. But a moment's reflection will reveal the logic of this position. With no government, the Polish government was interned in Romania. Remember, there's no one to negotiate with, nobody to which the police, local governments, and military are responsible. Polish ambassadors to foreign countries no longer represent their government because there's no government. The question of the state in international law. Every definition of a state recognizes the necessity of a government or organized political authority. Once the Polish government crossed the border into Romania, it was no longer a government. Even the Polish officials of the day recognized this by trying to create the impression that the government had never been interned since it had been handed over to somebody else before crossing into Romania. So everybody, Poles included, recognized that by interning themselves in Romania, the Polish government had created a situation whereby Poland was no longer a state. Can you invade a state that's not a state? Anytime one of these disinformation agents try to say something like Stalin and Hitler split up Poland, ask them, can you invade a state that's not a state? And then just watch them fumble and fuck it up because they have no idea what they're talking about. Now we do. He says this is not just a reasonable interpretation, not just an intelligent, logical deduction, but one among several possible deductions. As I've demonstrated in this paper, it was virtually everybody's interpretation at the time. Every major power, plus the former Polish Prime Minister himself, shared it. Once this problem is squarely faced, everything else flows from it. So, the secret protocol to the MR Pact was no longer valid in that it was about spheres of influence in Poland, a state. So it's not valid when it's no longer a state. That's how this works, guys. By September 15th, at the latest, Germany had taken the position that Poland no longer existed as a state. Even Germany agrees. Not that that's the primary reason we believe this, right? We don't... Anyways, once Poland ceased to exist as a state, this secret protocol did not apply any longer. Therefore, if they wanted to, the Germans could march right up to the Soviet frontier. Or, and this is what Hitler was in fact going to do if the Soviet Union did not send in troops, they could facilitate the creation of puppet states, like a pro-Nazi Ukrainian nationalist state. Is that what they want? The people who are crying about Stalin and Hitler splitting up Poland? Is that what they wanted? I think so, honestly. I think they'd be happier. They hate the communists more than they hate Nazis. We know this. In any case, once Hitler had taken the position that Poland no longer existed as a state, and therefore that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact's agreement on spheres of influence in the state of Poland was no longer valid, the Soviet Union had only two choices. Either send in the Red Army into Western Ukraine and Western Byelorussia, to establish sovereignty there, or let Hitler send the Nazi army right up to the Soviet border. There it is. You guys, I think this is the best explanation of this so far. The Red Army could cross the border without invading or committing aggression against Poland. By sending its troops across the border, the USSR was claiming sovereignty, so no one else could do so. That is, a pro-Nazi Ukrainian nationalist state or Nazi Germany itself. Legitimacy flows from the state, and there was no longer any Polish state. Therefore, the Polish army was no longer a legitimate army, but a gang of armed men acting without any legitimacy. Having no legitimacy, the Polish army should have immediately laid down its arms and surrendered. Of course, it could keep fighting, but then it would no longer be fighting as a legitimate army, but as partisans. Partisans have no rights at all except under the laws of the government that does claim sovereignty. Some Polish nationalists claim that the Soviets showed their perfidy by refusing, once they'd sent troops across the Soviet frontier, to allow the Polish army to cross the border into Romania. Over first says, but this is all wrong. The USSR had diplomatic relations with Romania. The USSR could not permit thousands of armed men to cross the border from areas where it had sovereignty into Romania, a neighboring state. Imagine if, say, Mexico or Canada tried to permit thousands of armed men to cross the border into the United States. Next, the renegotiation of spheres of influence, September 39. All this is referred to directly in a Ribbentrop, a German foreign minister, to Schulenburg, the German ambassador to Moscow, a communication of September 15th and September 16th, with his reference to the possibility of the formation in this area of new states. Note that Ribbentrop is very displeased with the idea that the Soviets would take the threat to the Ukrainian and White Russian populations by Germany as a ground for Soviet action, and wants Schulenburg to get Molotov to give some other motive. He was unsuccessful, and this was exactly the motive the Soviets gave. Nor can it be demanded of the Soviet government that it remained indifferent to the fate of its blood brothers, the Ukrainians and Byelorussians, inhabiting Poland, who even formerly were without rights and who now have been abandoned entirely to their fate. The Soviet government deems it its sacred duty to extend the hand of assistance to its brother Ukrainians and brother Byelorussians inhabiting Poland. The German government was already considering that Poland no longer existed. There's no reference to Poland, only to, quote, the area lying to the east of the German zone of influence, etc. Next, Polish imperialism. All right. A word of explanation regarding the Soviet reference to the fate of its blood brothers, the Ukrainians and Byelorussians inhabiting Poland. As the Treaty of Riga, signed in March 21, the Russian Republic, the Soviet Union was not officially formed until 24. The Russian Republic, okay, exhausted by the Civil War and foreign intervention, agreed to give half of Byelorussia, now he's changing it to Belarus, I'm just going to say Belorussia and Ukraine, to the Polish imperialists in return for a desperately needed peace. We use the words Polish imperialists advisedly because Poles, native speakers of the Polish language, were in the small minority in western Belorussia and western Ukraine, the areas that passed to Poland in this treaty. The Polish capitalist regime then encouraged ethnic Poles to populate these areas to Polonize them. How do you say this?
Polonize.
Colonize. And put all kinds of restrictions on the use of the Belarusian and Ukrainian language. Up until the beginning of 1939, when Hitler decided to turn against Poland before making war on the USSR, the Polish government was maneuvering to join Nazi Germany in a war on the USSR in order to seize more territory. As late as January 26, 1939, Polish Foreign Minister Beck was discussing this with Nazi Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop in Warsaw. Ribbentrop wrote, "I then spoke to Beck once more about the policy to be pursued by Poland and Germany towards the Soviet Union, and in this connection also spoke about the question of the Greater Ukraine, and again proposed Polish-German collaboration in this field." Beck made no secret of the fact that Poland had aspirations directed towards the Soviet Ukraine and a connection with the Black Sea. Polish Foreign Minister Beck was telling Ribbentrop that Poland would like to seize all of the Ukraine from the USSR, for that was the only way Poland could have a connection with the Black Sea. In occupying Western Belorussia and Western Ukraine, the USSR was reuniting Belarusians and Ukrainians east and west. This is what the Soviets meant by the claim that they were liberating these areas. The word liberation is conventionally used when an occupying imperialist power withdraws, and that's what happened here. Next, the Polish government in exile. Beginning of October 39, the British and French governments recognized the Polish government in exile in France. Later, it moved to England. This was an act of hostility against Germany, of course, but the UK and France were already at war with Germany. The USA took the position of refusing to recognize the conquest of Poland, but treated the Polish government in exile in Paris in an equivocal manner. Evidently, it wasn't sure what to do. The USSR could not recognize it for a number of reasons. Recognizing it would be incompatible with the neutrality of the USSR in the war. It would be an act of hostility against Germany, with which the USSR had a non-aggression pact and a desire to avoid war. The USSR did recognize it in July of 1941 after the Nazi invasion. The Polish government in exile could not exercise sovereignty anywhere. And most important, if the USSR were to recognize the Polish government in exile, the USSR would have had to retreat back to its pre-September 1939 borders, because the Polish government in exile would never recognize the Soviet occupation of Western Belorussia and Western Ukraine. Then, Germany would have simply marched up to the Soviet frontier. To permit that would have been a crime against the Soviet people, of course, and as the British and French soon agreed, a blow against them and a big boost to Hitler as well. Polish government uniquely irresponsible. Yeah, it was just like now. Don't listen to polls. Listen to these very specific government in exile polls. Kind of wild, yeah. No other government during World War II did anything remotely like what the Polish government did. Many governments of countries conquered by the Axis formed governments in exile to continue the war. But only the Polish government interned itself in a neutral country, thereby stripping itself of the ability to function as a government and stripping their own people of their existence as a state. Almost like they're playing both sides here. That's accurate. So what should the Polish government leader have done once they realized they were completely beaten militarily? They should have remained somewhere in Poland, if not the capital Warsaw, then the eastern Poland. If they set up an alternative capital in the east, something the Soviets had prepared to do east of Moscow in case the Nazis captured Moscow, then they could have preserved a rump Poland. There, it should have capitulated, as, for example, the French government did in July of 1940. Or could have sued for peace, as the Finnish government did in March 40. Then Poland, like Finland, would have remained as a state, though it would certainly have lost territory. Welcome back, Ross. We're reading Grover Furr's take about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. He continues, or the Polish government could have fled to Great Britain or France, countries already at war with Germany. Polish government leaders could have fled by air anytime. Or they could have gotten to the Polish port of Gdynia, which held out until September 14th and fled by boat. Why didn't they? Did Polish government leaders think they might be killed? Well, so what? Tens of thousands of their fellow citizens and soldiers were being killed. Maybe they really did believe Romania would violate its neutrality with Germany and let them pass through to France. If they did this, they were remarkably stupid. There's never been any evidence that the Romanian government gave them permission to do this. Did they believe Britain and France were going to save them? If so, that too was remarkably stupid. Even if the British and French really intended to field a large army to attack German forces in the West, the Polish army would have had to hold against the Wehrmacht for a month at least, perhaps more. But the Polish army was in rapid retreat after the first day or two of the war. Or maybe they fled simply out of sheer cowardice. That is what their flight out of Warsaw, the Polish capital, suggests. Everything that happened afterwards was a result of the Polish government being interned in Romania. Here's how the world might have been different if a rump Poland had remained after surrender to Hitler. A rump Poland might finally have agreed to make a mutual defense pact that included the USSR. That would have restarted collective security, the anti-Nazi alliance between the Western Allies and the USSR that the Soviets sought but UK and French leaders rejected. That would have greatly weakened Hitler, probably eliminating much of the Jewish Holocaust, certainly preventing the conquest of France, Belgium, and the rest of Europe, and certainly prevented many millions of deaths of Soviet citizens. Poland could have emerged from World War II as an independent state, perhaps a neutral one like Finland, Sweden, or Austria. All this and more, if only the Polish government had remained in their country at least long enough to surrender, as every other government did. Isn't that fucking fascinating? You guys just simply don't take anyone seriously about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact until they've demonstrated to you that they've read this. This seems like very important reading. Really good shit. Seems like the commies are on the right side of history a lot. Yeah, I think it's just about every single time. And this has been one of these things that's been bugging me. As in, I have not yet done the deep dive on this until today. So what are you going to say? Chat, what will you say next time a liberal or, just a fascist or an anti-communist or whatever brings up the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact? What are you going to say when they say to you, well, did you know Stalin and Hitler made a secret deal to split up Poland? What are you going to say? If you say anything at all. What are you going to say? When they say, did you know that the Nazis and the Soviet Union started World War II by invading Poland? By having a joint invasion of Poland? What are you going to say? Eat shit. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Can't argue with that. Eat shit, chud. Read Grover Fur. Fucking loser. It's like, oh yeah? Did you learn that on Reddit? Seriously. Nobody at the time said that, the Soviet Union is invading. None of the countries said that. League of Nations didn't say it. You'd say, boo-hoo, the U.S. funded the German industry to roll on the USSR. Then the Soviets said, no, you, LOL, and made the dumb Nazi turn on the Brits instead.
Little commie.
Ben Bang Boom 10. That was great info. I'm glad
Thanks,
you liked
Dan.
that.
That was some great info.
Appreciate that. That was a good one, right? This is like, it's been one of these things that's like been like an itch that I haven't scratched yet, Because you hear this all the time. You hear this weird Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact argument all the time, and you're like, what are you doing? And they're not like helping themselves at all by being wrong about everything else in the fucking world. They don't do themselves any favors by being wrong about just about everything else. But what are you going to tell somebody who's not a scholar of World War II in order to fully understand what's going on with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and how to push against bad faith arguments? I think it's important to be like, hey, if they didn't do this, if the Soviet Union didn't intervene Number one, there was no Polish government. They were gone. Therefore, there's no Polish state. Number two, if the Soviet Union didn't intervene, Nazis would have taken all of Poland and started a pro-Nazi puppet state. Do they want that? Obviously, their answer should be no. Number three, like, if the Soviets didn't intervene, they'd have Nazis right on their border. And I don't know if you know this, but Nazis fucking hate Russians and the Soviet Union. They fucking hate them, okay? They hate communists. They killed 27 million communists. Let me put it this way. 27 million communists, Soviets, lost their lives fighting the Nazis. 27 million. Unfathomable. I'm glad we found that Grover Fur article. That was banger. So it's a lot. Welcome in, Q. Just started listening. Can you give the cliff notes? I just sort of did. Main point is that this. Poland did not have a government. They didn't have a state. If they did, it would have World War II could have ended a lot better. They could have prevented a lot of the Holocaust. And in that sense, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was null and void because there was no Polish state to keep sovereign. If the Soviets didn't intervene, Nazi Germany would have set up a puppet state in Poland. And of course, that would also mean that there would be Nazis right on Russia on the Soviet Union's borders. If only the Polish government had remained in their country at least long enough to surrender, as every other government did, it would have greatly weakened Hitler, possibly eliminated much of the Jewish Holocaust, prevented the conquest of France, Belgium, and the rest of Europe, and prevented many millions of deaths of Soviet Unions. And again, in addition to that, if the Soviets didn't intervene, World War II could have ended with the Nazis winning. Did they want that? So that's really the TLDR, the Cliff Notes, is like, well, why are we even talking about this? Because very online people keep bringing up the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, not knowing what they're talking about. They're actually taking pro-Nazi talking points by talking shit about the USSR intervening in Poland. Isn't that fascinating? They're actually making an argument. If they were alive at the time, they'd be making an argument. Oh, just let Hitler take Poland, set up the pro-Nazi state. These people are sick. So that's why we're even talking about it, is because very online people keep bringing it up. So why do they keep bringing it up? Because they think it makes the USSR look bad. If you look into it, it makes them look fucking brilliant, actually. They did nothing wrong. So that's the TLDR. But if you want the link to read, check it out. That's a real banger. Grover Fur. It's your boy. Let's go, homie. So what I want to do now is go back to the thread, go back to the auto mod reply, and check out some of these videos. Because now that we've read about it and wrapped our head around it intellectually, I think this is going to hit. I think this is going to make a lot of more sense now. So here we go. Yeah. And what I'm probably going to do is, if you're watching this, I may upload this to YouTube and post this to the deprogram, which is one of the only good places on Reddit. Exactly right. I'm going to end this video now because I know you can go watch these videos on your own. All right. But if you are watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit subscribe right here on YouTube. It's free. Make a comment below. Let me know what you thought. What did you learn? And join us right here on the Twitch community where I stream almost each day, twitch.tv/iDanSimpson. Love your face.
Goodbye.